Let me go short recap from last week. Back about 2 weeks ago from Jung, Neumann. Let's make a recap from last week. Last week the discussion was about the concept of that no one comes toward learning anything with their own presuppositions, their own hanuchas, and through that they interpret whatever they're reading, learning, saying, and therefore the concept that you just open up a Sofer, open up a book and just go learn inside and see and understand what it's telling you on its own terms seems to be a fantasy. That was last week. Now, somebody recently gave a shir, a drusha, a lecture about the concept if you're allowed to go to, as he frames it, non-Jewish therapists to heal oneself, mental health. That was what the title, that was what the discussion was about. So we're not here to take apart the shir. The thing is just, the only reason why I'm bringing it up, I think because his outcome and the hanuchas that he came with is precisely the point I was trying to bring out last week. So I think to be the koichel apoyel to actually bring out exactly how certain category mistakes happen and it changes the whole view. Let me explain myself. Let's get into it. We'll understand more what I'm trying to say. So he basically starts off the shir that you can't going to a non-Jewish therapist is a problem because the goyim approach they have for therapy is that the goal of a person is to be happy. It should be benichas and nefesh, and therefore if there's any issues, they help him absolve the issues, take care of his problems through a way which is not so much it's basically saying everything is okay, they basically have to deal with this trauma as opposed to a Yiddish mahalach, which will be that faket. You have a purpose on over here, it's not necessarily for yourself, it's for his family, for your kids, whatever it is. So the approach is a whole different approach. Therefore, you're going to go to a goyish therapist, he's healing you in the wrong way. Now, that is basically his thesis. Just to be fair, he didn't say that he can't go to it and say obviously about the famous Shiv Moshe. But again, we're not even talking about trying to get to halacha aspects over here. We're trying to bring out a certain point which we're going to get to. Now he started off with the Chasam Sofer, which is Chasam Sofer. That's a very famous Chasam Sofer. That he asked Chasam Sofer, how can you go to a doctor who learned from Goyim? In other words, most the medical sciences are basically based on, from dissecting bodies, whatever. Most of them are from Goyim, and therefore he looked at that. He learned from a Goyish body of how to heal a Yid. That's a Yiddish, even the Goyish doctor to heal a Yid, even a Yiddish doctor to heal a Yid. Ultimately, they learned from Goyim. And the Masa, the Gemara zogt that Goyim are different than Yidden. With what? Because and therefore this is that says that the Yid not only Megillah is not only drinking Megillah, but the Goy even drinks Megillah, nothing happens to him. Why? Because either the Achdish Kutz is Chuvul Gufayu. So how can we learn? So the Gemara takes it as a given that a Goyish body is different than a Yiddish body. So if the Goyish doctor learned, or even a Yiddish doctor learned from on a Goy, not from an onigoy, and therefore, how can you go use it to the Yiddish? I think that's Chasam Sofer's protest, and Mahi Aluch L'Maseh. He believes in that the only time there's a Sofer Knefushas, whatever. Again, we're not trying to get into the Aluch aspect over here. That's Chasam Sofer. So, Tosfos even makes it even stronger because Tosfos asks, he seems to Shabbos at a certain day that the Ige B'mitzvah is also Chavai Gufayu. So Tosfos says that there's a difference depending on what it is. And it comes to medical aspects, in other words, something which is Nechnes Gufay, Masham, whatever it is, that there it works. There Chavai Gufayu, Achish Gusa and Mushim Chavai Gufayu, then for more medical things, Mashan kind, the Yidag Mitzvahs for other things. The Minchas Pitim, so he calls the Minchas Pitim, and I have no idea where he got it from because Minchas doesn't mention anything about, but just in the guy at this part, that this Isser of eating Shkutzer and Mushim is afke for a Yid because of Yisem Kedoshim, because of a Tamtim Belev. Lashain Kaim, when it comes to the Gash, the actual physical gift is not a problem. That's what he calls the Minchas Pitim, arguing on Chasam Sofer. Minchas Pitim doesn't say that at all. He does bring out I don't think anybody brings on this concept. The concept Tintin Belev is Emes Gezach. I mean, but in this respect of learning of the Chasam Sevi's question, it makes no sense because it's clear from Toisus that it's a physical thing which you're eating. And saying Pusha that Tantam Belev is Nigaya to neutralizing the venom, the sam, which is in the water. The Minchas just says is that Lamasa going today is don't nishkus and musham, therefore you couldn't learn out. That's the Minchas Pitim. Now, this is a relatively ancillary point, and we try to bring it out of Minchas Pitim. At the Pitim, Yid works different, the Kedisha, whatever it is, but Shaitan is not, even if we'll say it wouldn't make a difference. The main part, which is in the Gaia, is that he says that a Yid and a Goy are different, betafkid. The Goy, Torah is given to a Yid, not to a Goy, and therefore a Yid is different than a Goy. So you can't go have the therapy from a Goy onto a Yid. That is basically the main thing what he says. Now, what I believe is that he's making a category mistake, and that's why I'm bringing it in over here. And let's take it apart, right? So anybody walks away from the conclusion that is a big problem. Why is it a problem? Because a therapist, a Goyish therapist, would try to heal a Yid in a non-Jewish way, which will be a problem. Now, obviously, he does have some points. However, what exactly does it mean that is different? Does it mean to say is that the goal of a therapist must be a Goyish therapist is different than a Yid? Does it mean that the assumptions, you have to check his assumptions prior to beforehand, but not that the goals are different necessarily? Does it mean that every therapeutic method has to be different for every single person? He almost says that thing, everybody thinks differently, therefore that there can't be this one therapeutic method to everybody. So how many therapeutic methods you need to have then also? I mean, according to this assumption. And does it mean to say is that a Goy can understand the maladies that a Yid has, that if a Yiddish anger or anxiety, shame or anything else is different than a Goyish anger? Is that what I mean? He's not clear, and each think it makes a big difference. As we'll see, the reason it's not clear is because the thing that we were discussing last week is what is missing from this whole conversation. So the question over here is, what really is therapy? That is the question. In other words, there is 3 levels, I believe, which we have to separate. There's the telos. Telos, right, means the goal, the point. What is the point of a person's life? Why was the person created? Right? What is his happiness? What is happiness? All these are questions of the direction, the point, we'll call the hashkufa. Everything's really hashkufa. We'll see, but that is the telos. That is the first level. The second level is the meta-psychology. That is, what is the meta-psychology? What exactly is the nefesh? What is the soul of a person? Right, what exactly does middos means? What exactly is kas? Right, what exactly is fear? What is guilt? How does it interact in the public? That is what we call meta-psychology. And then there's a therapeutic aspect of it. In other words, when you go to a therapist, what is the therapist actually doing with the person? Right? How's he helping with his panic? How's he helping with depression? Void. So these are 3 levels which you have to keep in mind. There's a telos. There's the point of the person. There's a meta-psychology. In other words, what exactly is your view of the person's nefesh itself? And then there's a therapeutic the action itself of therapy. So now, when we say that a Yid is different than a Goy, what we're saying is that the telos, the Torah that a person has, that a Yid has, is different than a Goy. His tafkid is different. His whole mahalach echaim, let's call it, is different, and that obviously is correct. I mean, it stands by definition. If we have the Torah and we don't, the Goyish telos is different than the Yid. It goes both ways. Right? We're different than the Goy, and the Goy is different than us because we have different values, different everything. That is 100% correct. But the problem over here is that even though the goal matters, the goal doesn't give me the method, the third thing, of how we heal. So even if the goal, the telos, is different, doesn't mean the method is different. Why? Because there is a step in between meta-psychology, which we're missing, right? So it's true that a Goyish therapist can make a categorical mistake by importing the non-Torah telos onto the person, right? And for instance, he could treat autonomy as the highest good. He could hold that the person should not care about anybody else, and he's then what he's doing is he's importing his telos in the therapeutic method. But it's still two separate distinct things. Mitzad sheni, a yid could import his telos into the therapeutic method. He can say that if you have trauma, it's pushes a lack of a minute. Anxiety is echte yireh shamayim. If a person is embarrassed, ashamed, that's tshiva. In other words, I could take telos and put it into the symptoms. Also, both can make categorical mistakes, right? Now, so the question is not so much what the person's telos is. The question is which meta-psychology is the person importing, which is then giving him the therapeutic method. Let's bring this a case in point. The speaker said that Lamasa, we have a Pitik, a Mesechte, a Mishnah, called Mesechtes Avos, which is given away directly for middos, and it's a Chazal speak about a Geishim and those things. Even though so, in other words, the question is, why do we need Bechalal to learn in psychology? Just open up a Chazal, open up Mishnais, Mesechtes Avos, open up Rishonim, open up Sofer Misid, and we have a whole full-fledged psychological therapeutic method for a Yid. So on the face of it, this seems a good question. Why do we need anything? We have the Chachma Torah. That's all we need. Now this, the Rambam himself refutes this. How? Because the Rambam wrote a Perish on Perish Mishnais, he wrote a Perish on Mesechtes Avos. However, before he wrote the Perish on Avos, what did he do? He wrote something called the Shemoneh Perakim, Hagdumah to Mesechtes Avos. Right? And what was the Hagdumah? He writes in there that the reason why it's Hagdumah is because before we are going to approach how Chazal gave us what don't call therapy for Shaisa, but the way it goes how to heal the soul, we have to understand what the soul is. So before a doctor goes and learns medicine, he has to first learn basic biology. He has to learn how the body looks. In other words, I can't apply medicine if I don't understand the nefesh, the person. So that's why I'm writing the Shemoneh Perakim, which is a hagdumah of the Toldos nefesh, of how the nefesh of a person is constituted, and therefore nukdem. Afterwards, I could go and actually learn Mesechtes Avos, as the Rambam says clearly. The Rambam understood that there's not something that you could simply learn a mitzvah and through that take out therapy or take out how to go about your life. There is a meta-psychology. There is an understanding of what exactly the nefesh, what exactly the person is. And only through that can I understand the person. I can understand the Mesechtes Avos. Or, to put it more in the terms of last week, is only through my understanding, through the lens of my understanding of the person, of the nefesh, through there can I learn Mesechtes Avos. A case in point, that the Mishnah Mesechtes Avos, okay, so let's go before we get to Mishnah. Let's go to the Rambam in Mesechtes Dais, in Hilchos Dais. The question over here is kas, right? Now, kas is a emotion, right? It's something which can have many reasons why it comes up, right? Now, there's what caused it, and it's an emotion. It's a hergish which a person feels. Right? It could come from a person, if he felt somebody wronged him, he could see somebody doing something wrong. It could come from many different things, and it gives us different questions, right? So what is the cause of it? Does it always come from the person's ego? Do we view it as a sickness of the soul? Is it ever be'etzim a hedgish of kedisha? Right? In other words, somebody says that he has anger, it doesn't tell us anything really, because I don't know what exactly the cause of anger is. So when he goes to a therapist, right? Basically, the therapist is going to ask somebody, anybody, what should he do to heal that person? How should he heal it, right? Should he try to get the person should not feel kas at all? Should he redirect it? Should he work with it? Well, it depends what you consider the cause. What exactly is kas? What is anger? So in other words, the name of an emotion in of itself doesn't tell us anything what should be done with that emotion, right? So what does tell us? The meta-psychology, the understanding of the person, understanding of the nefesh, and therefore where these anagaishim or emotions fit, tells us how we're supposed to how we should therapize this person. Right, so now there is a Mishnah in Masechtas Avos, Perakim, Mishnah Yidal. What it says? It says a Dalid dies b'udam, and the last one over here is a Chassid is what? That he is kushel lechois v'noich leratzis. That is what the Mishnah says. That is what a Chassid is when it regards to kas. Now, the Rambam is mefarish, and he says that his tackle that he's called Ayich Kudo Hasavlin, Shesavlin Niso Yesaira, Ashi Yikrev Lo Adar Hagusha V'Dover Hakas, Shesh Lo Yipachisias middos Hakas. This is a Chassid. In other words, he says a Chassid is somebody who completely is the point as kushel lechois. He literally does not get angry. He worked on himself so much so that he doesn't get angry. This is what a Chassid is. What does that mean? The Rambam in the Hagduma in the Shemoneh Perakim, he brings up. He distinguishes between a Chassid and somebody that is a somebody that works on himself. Somebody is moishel benafshay. What is the difference? It says a Chassid. It said emotional benafshay is somebody that feels these emotions, feels things, feels like negative character traits. However, he is emotional benafshay that he doesn't allow it to overtake him. Mashak and a Chassid is somebody who worked himself so much to the level that doesn't even feel the negative character trait doesn't even arise in him. That's what a Chassid is. So with this on the lens, with this understanding, I'm understanding what a Chassid is, as it explains the Mishnah in Avos. That what? That a Chassid is somebody that is kushel lechois, is the doesn't feel the negative emotion of anger, and that is what a Chassid is. Because the Rambam in Hilchos Dayis explains that there's what is. Let's in the bigger picture. Let's put it more into focus on the bigger picture of the Rambam's understanding of the person, the nefesh. That he says a nefesh. He says a person. There's the golden mean, the middle way, the middle path. Right? What is it? That there's every middah has an extreme, two extremes, a positive and negative. Well, not a positive, because in the Rambam everything, the positive is the middle way, but you have extreme in one way. Let's say somebody's a kamtzon. A kamtzon is one way, and mefazim oisov, somebody that gives up everything, is the other extreme. The best is the middle path. Right? The same thing it is basically with almost every single middah. He says every single middah that basically it's like originally how do you train yourself? You go if somebody, let's say somebody gives away all his money, so he should go and be extremely more accomplished for a long time until he is oike that middah of being a mefazim oisav to the extreme, and then goes into the middle way, which is the best way for almost everything. He says then there are a few middas which is so bad. Now, there's no middle way. The correct way is not the middle way. The correct way is completely not. One of them was Gava. The other one he says is Kas. To the point he's saying that even if somebody has to be noyeg with Kas, such as a Rebbe who has to go and discipline his Talmud, or a Moshel, a Shodet on the Eid, and he has to go and somebody punish, take punitive actions against someone, he's not allowed to feel actual kas. He could pretend as if he has kas, but he himself is not allowed to have kas because it's that bad. So now, let's bring us back to the whole Mishnah of I was a Chassid is kushel lechois v'noich leratzos. So the Rambam is a Chassid specifically, because a Chassid is not a moishel benafshay, it's a Chassid. A Chassid is one that's already oiked the midara legamri, and in this case, the midara for the Rambam of kas is that you're never supposed to experience the actual emotion of negative character trait of kas, to the point that even if you have to be noiga kas, you can only pretend, you should look outward as if you're feeling kas, but you yourself are not allowed to experience actual kas, which is why, as looked up in the Mishnah, says that a Chassid is kushel lechois and lechratzes means literally that he does not feel any kas. This is how the Rambam understands. So that means the Mishnah, according to the Rambam, is never legitimizing kas. Is simply saying is at the most, if you have to be noyeg with kas, it should look like it, but you should never experience it. That's a shittis Rambam. And on the spot, Rabbeinu Yonah, on the spot, he doesn't bring out the Rambam, but he says a different shot in the Mishnah. What does he say? He says, look it up over there, but the gist of what he says is, look at Rabbeinu Yonah, that it's not shot that it says that, basically his question is, why does it say eine koyes? where it says kushel lechois. It says, I should say eine kois. Look up because about this. Sometimes the mid of kas could be appropriate. For instance, you see somebody is being over, basically with Masa Pinchas, as it says. Pinchas was an actual legitimate cause, a legitimate reason, a legitimate emotion experience of kas, and therefore you can't say eine kois, but it's kushel lechois. It's a very dangerous thing to go down that path of kas, but of course the actual experience of kas is under certain circumstances allowed. So that's how the Rabbeinu Yonah learns the Mishnah. So now we have one Mishnah and two different pshutim from Rishonim, how to understand the Mishnah, and it means two different things. According to Rambam, you're never allowed to have any emotive, any experience, any actual hegesh of kas. According to the Rabbeinu Yonah, you're allowed to under a small circumstance, a specific circumstance, you are allowed to. However, the means is you can't just open up a Mishnah and just say you're not allowed to have kas because you don't know what that means. Depends how you're learning it. Now, I want to take this Mishnah and we're going to go a step further, and we're going to bring down the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, and Pashas Chasam, and the Arvei Nachal, and we'll see now a different way of viewing it. So I'm not saying that they're definitely not saying that's what Rabbeinu Yonah says. None of that Toldos sort of tries to put in the Rambam, whether he actually means the Rambam said that be'etzem or that's bekenan like the Rambam's Nishna guy, it doesn't make a difference. And ahead of time, we're not going to go through the whole Mamid, which is obviously depending on a lot of other understandings of what it is, but I'm going to bring you the gist of it so we can see it, and I think we'll understand the change, the concept of a lens, the concept of the meta-psychology, how it changes your whole view of every single aspect a lot better. So we'll start with the Toldos. Because until now we have the Rambam, we have Rabbeinu Yonah. I can still tell you that Mechlokes Rambam and Rabbeinu Yonah is Mechlokes specifically on kas, right? We have a local disagreement on kas. Not so much a whole different world, a whole different Mechlokes on how we understand the psychology of the person. However, the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, he brings down the Rambam in the Chassidus, and brings down the Chemish's question, because the Rambam makes a sound that you could be noite with a chus, that somebody is noite letzad for any, not directly in the path, somebody is noite for one tzad. Very like a Mishnah, how's the possible? Like, how's the pal? Anybody think that if you noite letzad gava, even to drop you a chuset? Obviously not. Again, not from the guy to the whole gist, but the gist that he's saying, look, the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, the Toldos says that of course there is a case that ultimately that the chused is one that goes lefnim shiras adin. He brings a thing from Avrum Avini. Avrum went down to Mitzrayim, and he went down to Mitzrayim precisely in the Mukim Timeh in order to go be male the middos ra. Again, we're not going to go into every single part over here. It's not something guy to the point trying to bring out. However, the mushal he gives is he says is that if you give it's a Mishnah, the mitzvah of Yesed. Basically, he said if you're going to go down to a place, a pit without a ladder, what you do is you take a rope, you tie it onto something above, right, a pole or whatever it is, a stick or a tree, which is outside of the pit, and then you lower yourself down. Otherwise, not getting back up. So, in other words, to lower yourself into a place of timeh, or a lower place, you have to connect yourself to someplace on high, and then you can lower yourself down. That's the mushal he gives. He says the same thing over here is that at times it's necessary for a person to lower himself chitz lamachne, which by definition chitz lamachne is obviously a person who is outside of the community, outside of the accepted standard way hanhuga, and through that he could bring them back. So he says the same thing precisely with middos. He said at times you have to go down into a lower place, to bring up that which is lower, and you have to keep yourself connected to one high. Now, the Arvei Nachal says a similar concept, and he specifically says it on kas, and basically what he says is that it's a Pashas Lech Lechu. It's a concept of guiding, a concept of whatever it is. But the point which Arvei Nachal is saying, he says that he brings on the Zohar that says that even though we say that it says in Mesechus Nedurim, at least the concept says of it, that the Kol HaKoy is Kilo Avid V'Dezura, the Zoya says that sometimes that Rigza de Rabunan Tiva, that the anger of the Rabunan are good, when it's done for Hashem's sake. So he brings down the Chovos HaLevavos. Chovos HaLevavos says that it gives a dichotomy between the bad and good middos, and he says that he has the Nefesh is having a discussion with the Seichel and that Perakim, and he says that explain to me what is supposed to do with the bad middos. So Chovos HaLevavos says that at times you could use the bad middah for correcting, such as also the Pinchas. That's a kas. He brings down a whole list of each bad midah and a good midah. So Arvei Nachal, using this Chovos HaLevavos, and he says that you can use the bad midah for a good cause. He says specifically kas. You can use the bad midah for a good cause, and the mushal he gave, the reasoning. I'm trying to think. I don't want to get too much into the actual reasoning because that's like the whole separate and understanding exactly middos. But he said the reason why we use the bad midah, the reason why we could use the bad midah is because basically he says that there's every single thing has a chiyas, right? Now the chiyas is toiv of the yid is toiv, and the bad the ra is a chiyas of the whole of the world. Now there's two types of it is killing the actual midah. The point of it here is completely neutralizing the negative character trait, which in that case Taka gives at that point there's no more shlita of the ra on the person. But he said there's even a higher avodah, which is a lot more dangerous, because at that point you have to sort of lower yourself. You have to bring yourself into a dialogue with the negative character trait, which through that, by doing that and then mastering over it, what you do is you're bringing it back to the Kiddush. That's what Gaidim technically is. The difference between between not having the Goyim, not having the Imis Oilim Shoilit on the Yisrael is through negating the character, the bad character traits, because that's where the Geder is. Whereas elevating the negative character trait into Avodas Hashem, that is what actually Gaidim come from. Again, this is really a bigger middos, the concept of obviously, you have the continuously concept of tzaddik going down to the thing, Shevi Yiput tzaddik become, has many different close-knit things eventually, which we'll get to it. I'm going to discuss more the piyudets and the different shittas and chassidus, exactly how it works. But basically this concept. Now, what I'm trying to make out with this, that from a Rambam view, this doesn't make any sense. Why? Because there's no such thing as saying that a midra has a kedisha, has an ability to be mala any ra. If I view ra as inherently a sickness of the soul, if I say that the whole point of the person, the ethic, the correct path of the person is to negate the negative character trait. There is no negative character trait to use in a positive sense. If negating me say is you do not feel anger, you don't feel any single thing, only meaning anger specifically, because certain things that Rambam does at the middle way, which that's why we're discussing anger specifically. According to Rambam, anger, gavada, you're supposed to negate the point that you do not feel it. That is, what does it mean? That means you do not feel anger at all. So there's the concept of using anger in a positive way, to use it for a kedusha does not exist, because you're not supposed to feel anger. What does it mean to use anger in a positive way? There is no anger to feel with. The Chovos HaLevavos Rabbeinu Yonah's understanding, we could use it in a positive way, and then the Chassidic twist that is basically is that it is precisely, the point is not to negate, the point of it here is to be mala, to use it in the correct way. In the Kedusha, there's a whole different understanding of what the person's ethical path and kas specifically is supposed to be. Again, according to Rambam, the point, the chusid, is the one which completely negates the negative character trait, the feeling, the possibility of feeling kedusha of timah, of the negative of kas. Therefore, I cannot say that I could use kas for kedusha because that concept doesn't exist. There's no kas. Even by Pinchas, you have to say about Pinchas. So you'll have to say about Pinchas. The Rambam doesn't anywhere speak about Pinchas specifically, but let's say the place where he does speak about the concept of by my medieval, by Moshe, has explained. Rambam has a problem with Moshe, right? And the Moed he speaks about it. The problem with Moshe, we know clearly was chusid, meaning he was the top of it all. To the point where when it comes to Nevi'ah, for instance, the Rambam gives 10 dagas on Nevi'ah, and it comes to Moshe Rabbeinu, he says that we don't bet him understand what it is. He gives one, as I was thinking about it once, I'm never going to mention it again. He does mention it once or twice later. So whatever, exactly what. But either way, he says that Moshe is a point that there's, we have no on this. He was perfect as much as a person can be, whatever it is. We're not going to know exactly what Moshe. So how is that possible? Look at the Ma'amriva. His upshot is that Moshe actually felt anger himself. It's just he allowed the populace to believe that Hashem was actually angry, that he was channeling, quote unquote, Hashem's end. That was the problem. Not Moshe himself actually felt it. As he explains in the Moira. We'll have to go by extension, saying that's the Rambam learns Pinchas also. He doesn't speak about Pinchas directly. But that said, that in other words, there's no way of actually feeling the negative emotion, right? However, the other shoy, the Chassidus specifically is faked. Pinchas was actually a lived experience of kineh, of thing. It was an actual thing. I mean, pretty much a period. That's period. It's a Pashas Pinchas. Again, it's going back to concept from the nefesh. So it really is, in truth, this whole understanding of it is because what the nefesh of a person is for Chassidus is completely different what the nefesh is for the Rambam. It's a whole different nefesh, whole different person, and means a whole different thing. I just don't want to get into it right now because we don't have the time to take us too far afield. But the point of it here is that as the Rambam understands Pinchas, Rabbeinu Yonah clearly says that Pinchas actually had a hegesh of kineh, and it was allowed in that sense. Oy bezoy that say is that the therapy of kineh, of kas for Rabbeinu Yonah is completely different than therapy for the Rambam, of kas for the Rambam. Even though they both learn this, they have the same mission, the same Chazal, same everything, they learn completely different. Why? Because the whole understanding of the ethics of what the perfect person is completely different. So you can't just say is next Sofer. Let's open up a cipher and let's see what it says. Because I could say same cipher, everybody learns different, right? So when a person comes to a therapist and says, I am angry, right? So the shala here, what is the therapist supposed to hear? He's supposed to hear that the person is sick, he has anger, like a Rambam understanding. Is he supposed to hear that the person has a big ego, that he's afraid, and it's a reaction, it's a self-defense mechanism, right? Is he supposed to hear he was? But no, it could be a misplaced. It could be.
What he doesn't know that he has subconsciously. He doesn't mean it's hard.
Yes and no, but there's two aspects over here. We're gonna get back to it. Exactly, meaning the person coming to a therapist as a tzaddik, and the thing is,
it's calculated. It's calculated cost. You can't go complain about it. You know what I mean?
You're right. We're going to speak a bit more about it in a minute. Although, I just say right now, the therapy is still different. Right? Because according to the Rabbeinu Yonah, what the therapist has to do is completely different according to the Rabbeinu Yonah, according to the Rambam. Right? You can't negate the concept of the negative mid according to the Rabbeinu Yonah, according to Chassidus.
According to the Rambam, there is no negative. There's no positive in a negative mid, right?
Yeah.
And the Rabbeinu Yonah.
There is,
right? There's a calculated.
Exactly. Therefore, the therapy itself is definitely different. But even that, but even the cause itself could still be different. We're gonna get to in a second. We'll go back to the three things of the Telos, the meta-psychology, and the therapy. Either way, so the shala is therefore as going back to what we said originally, from the word anger, I'm angry. It doesn't tell me much. It depends where my meta-psychology, what my world, where I'm coming from is, right? So they said, a Rambam, person like the Rambam, will understand person is angry, that person is really has to be taught how to get to the middle way, right? According to the Rabbeinu Yonah specifically, it have to be purified. You have to go make sure, to use it to know how to direct it to the right places. But not that it has to be healed and taken away you shouldn't feel it. It has to be purified and directed to the right thing. Right? A trauma therapist will try to understand, is it trying to hide something? Is it a reaction, a negative reaction to something which happened, something's coming back in his life? These are all different questions, all different understandings of what anger, where it's coming from, what to do with it, depending on the lens, depending on the meta-psychology of each person. Of the person who's over there, right? So now, when the person said that going to a goyisha therapist is a problem, right? Why? Because they have a whole different telos, whole different understanding. So yes, he's correct that if a person is going to go to a goyisha therapist, and the goyisha therapist can go try to do is going to tell him that, for instance, if you have a negative emotion, if you have shame or guilt, then that's completely irrelevant. I mean, you shouldn't be having guilt at all. You should be feeling happy with yourself. Now, the reason why the therapist is wrong is because he's putting telos into his therapy. It's not so much the mahala, it's not so much the day, it's not so much his method. The point of view here is he himself is collapsing telos, what the values, into his method, into his therapy. That's why he is wrong. Not because he's a goy and the goy has a different telos thing. It's precisely because the therapist himself is collapsing telos with the therapeutic method. Right? But let's say the therapist will teach him a breathing technique of how to sort of come back to control of his emotions, or if he treat him how to avoid certain situations, anxiety, right? Or to tell him or to explain to him how to get past shame. They should be paralyzed with fear of being ashamed or whatever. Is that keneged the Torah? No, because that is not mixing in telos with the therapeutic method. There's two different aspects, right? So he's correct that it's possible that there could be issues, but that issue is not so much a therapeutic method. The issue is that mixing in telos into the therapeutic method, and then we'll explain this a bit more in a minute. So now, with this understanding, I want to bring something. I once heard somebody was giving a sheet, and here's what he said: Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov was a failed experiment. Why was Baal Shem Tov a failed experiment? Looked at the Rambam, or the Rishonim in general, or Aristotle. He's a big chus of Aristotle, that person. So Aristotle understood that ethics basically worked from the bottom up, or the philosophers call it Jacob's ladder, the Silam Yaakov, that basically everything goes by Droga, and the title, Roisha Megia Shemaimo. That's, the Rishonim already, that's how they use it. The mushal of Rosh Shemaimo. You start from the bottom and go up. That is how you normally start with ethics and making the middos in general. The Baal Shem Tov tried to do the opposite. Tried to start off with Rosh Shemaimo, hoping that the middos itself will be fixed through top down. That was Baal Shem Tov's experiment. Look, the master Baal Shem Tov failed because Matthias says Chassidim, his words, not mine. Chassidim don't have better middos, and therefore we have to go back to the Rambam. This is what he stated. Now, why is he wrong? Because his presupposition is that the Rambam's understanding of middos and the Baal Shem Tov's understanding of middos are exactly the same, and therefore he says that all the basically what the Rambam would try to do was fix the middos from the bottom up. Baal Shem Tov tried to fix the middos from the top down. Tried to do the same thing, different methods, and we see that his method didn't work. Had to go back to the Rambam. What he doesn't understand is that it's completely the opposite. But it's incommensurate. It's not the Rambam. Baal Shem Tov didn't try to do I'm trying to do a Rambam virtue ethics by starting top down. For the ethics for the Rambam is not the ethics of the Baal Shem Tov. For the Rambam, a negative character trait is never a positive. It can never be used positively, and as such, there is one mahalach, one approach to it. According to the Baal Shem Tov, it's completely not true. A negative character trait has to be done completely different, which is why the method to try to train the person is completely different. Because according to the Rambam, we could try to negate it completely. According to Baal Shem Tov, we have to purify, we have to direct it to a certain thing, but we cannot negate it fully, because the person by definition is part of his negative character trait. Now again, this is part of a bigger discussion, which we'll get to it one day, but just for the point we get it. Therefore, it's starting from the top, starting from the top. That is the method, according to the Baal Shem Tov's understanding of the person, of the nefesh, of middos. That is how we do it. The Rambam had a different understanding of the person, different understanding of the nefesh, different understanding of middos, and therefore he started off his way. So it's not pshat that it's fair and go back to the Rambam. It's a complete different thing. It's a complete different understanding of what middos, what the nefesh, what the tachas, what the person is. It's incommensurate. And if the person is has negative character traits, and he in the Chassidus oil, and he thinks he's doing correct, meaning that means his koich hadimion is extremely strong. His imaginative, he's imagining himself to be in a different place than he is. But again, it's a different approach. Which is why the method is different. Different meta-psychology, which is why the therapeutic action and the telos are different. But it's a meta-psychology which governs the therapy. It's not therapy which governs the meta-psychology. It's just the Rambam and the Baal Shem Tov held the same idea of middos, and they tried to do two different therapies. Their whole meta-psychology was different, and therefore the therapeutic action, the point, the mahalach of how to make the person to a better person is different because of that, right? So basically, to sum this up, that we have different approaches to the person, and therefore the therapy is different, right? So the question is not if there's a Yiddish mahalach, if there's a Yiddish way to learn, it can open up Masechtas Avos and therefore become a therapist or have therapy through that. The question is, what meta-psychology is governing me, and through that I'm going to read the sources differently regardless, right? So for the Rambam, it is more akin to virtue ethics, which virtue ethics means to say is that the question, the person that you should become is a measured individual, the one that it's his whole posture should be ordered to good, to a rational, weighed aspect, and train himself to actually, in other words, snapshot is that the chedivim to the chused the Moshe benafsha, right? That's what virtue ethics technically means. A chused is somebody, the point of virtue ethics get you to a chused, which is what? The Moshe benafsha is when you're in the mahalach to get to that point. The chused is he only likes things which are be'etzim good for his nefesh. Snapshot is he has to always fight to things which are good for him. That's the Rambam's mahalach, right? And therefore, what does anger, what does any of these negative emotions mean? Me say is you have not completed yourself, you still have an atiyah to ra. According to Rabbeinu Yonah Chassidus, it means a completely different thing. Now, so when a person says that he is angry, right? So these are two mahalachim things. Psychology will ask a completely different question. Psychology is asking is when a person says that he's angry, right? What does it mean? A person said he is guilt. So what does that mean? Where did he pick up the concept, the words, the meaning, the understanding of what guilt means? For instance, right? If a person says that he is guilty, for him, depending on how he was brought up, guilt could mean shame. Guilt could mean he feels he betrayed Hashem, he did a virus. Guilt means he has a religious OCD. It can mean many different things. It's the same word, different framings, depending where it comes from. That's what psychology is. Psychology is trying to figure out what the meaning of these words, what does it mean, what does these concepts mean for this individual. And through that, understand the person, and we can work on the therapeutic method, again, according to the Telos. But ultimately, it is three different realms, domains, and we cannot mix the things together, right? So in other words, the psychology is asking, how did this concrete person come to live his life, his passions in such a way? What was what formed the individual this way? That is what psychology is asking. So the Torah gives a final telos, but the Torah in of itself is obviously there is a person who is living in the world, and that is what formed his understanding of what things mean, right? To bring this point stronger to home, we'll go to postmodernism, right? Postmodernism, today's is, at least in the concept of postmodernism, that technically there is no real concrete, every person is plastic, malleable, there's no concrete essence of a human being and what forms of what he is. And therefore, it goes a step further. Because of that, ultimately, we could shape a person to any single way that he wants to be. There is no essence. And if there's no essence, every person is formed by external forces. By definition, if you have the essence that every person is the mahus from a person, that means that he's not formed in a different way, right? He's born like that. If you say that he's not born like that, he is formed. It says postmodernism that I can form it technically then in any way I want. That is how postmodernism understands the person, right? However, that is wrong, because yes, even if we accept there's no ultimate essence of a person is formed. Formed does not mean that he is completely liquid. He is still concrete. He is formed. He's poured into a mold, but there is still a mold which formed him. Right? If the culture forms a person, then he comes with a certain form. If language shapes a person, because there's all different malachim what exactly shapes a person, then he comes with a grammar of how so this more a structuralist way. It's a Caesarean way of understanding it. If the tradition shapes a person, then it is ultimately inherited categories of how he is formed, right? And then if family shapes a person, then it's obviously his family of how he fit in the right Lamushal. If a person is raised with a Torah home, right? There's a vaida to him does not mean the same. It doesn't mean a transgression. It comes with a certain stigma. It comes with a certain shame. Depends how his Rebbe treated it, right? It depends on multiple different aspects of it. What the word avaida means. If bittul Torah does not mean a halachic aspect of this concept, but you're not being about the Torah. It comes with a certain baggage of how he was formed and shaped and taught in school, in yeshiva, of what bittul Torah means. So there is no, a person that's raised in a certain image of what Hashem means, right? Whether he is a governing person, whether he is a father, whether he is any other word, understands what Chiva, for instance, means differently. So in other words, the psychology is trying to understand the space between the public words and the private life of the individual, how this person makes sense of the categories which he is put into. That is what psychology is trying to understand. So a rigid essentialist, one which holds that we have the Torah, and that's precisely what tells what a person is wrong, because the Torah has categories. However, how the person understands, how the person imbued himself with these categories, how the person interprets a category is dependent on how he was brought up. And a shallow postmodernist understanding to say that a person is malleable completely is wrong, because categories do give a certain shape. A person is formed, a person is not, he's not frozen, he continuously moves throughout his life, but he's also not liquid. He's open to change, but he has a form. Therefore, I think we have started off with the mistake of mixing in telos, what the Torah is telling me of what a person should be doing, with meta-psychology and therapy. They're all different questions. You're right. If a therapist tells a person that he should not feel guilty because it is such and such, he is wrong, not so much because of his method. He is wrong because he has mixed in telos into therapy, because of his meta-psychology, his understanding of what a person might be. But it's not so much therapy, it's you have to understand these are all separate aspects, and there's no such thing as just approaching Masechtas Avos or Chazal and then taking it out from it. As we saw, the case study of kas, of anger, how the Rishonim understand it one way. The Rambam understands that according to his understanding of what ethics of a person is. Rabbeinu Yonah understands different. Chassidus is completely different because of their understanding of what nefesh, what neshama over here is. So yes, there's no question that a secular therapist can definitely overstep his boundary, but it's not so much because of the therapy. It's not so much is because a yid needs a different type of therapy. It's more is because the boundaries between the three structure of telos, the meta-psychology, and therapy become blurred. The Chasam Sofer is referring to the physical aspect of a person, not the nefesh, not the neshama, not the thing. And again, I mean, if we don't, he's always separate. I mean, the Rambam clearly didn't hold like that. I mean, he says clearly in the Shemoneh Perakim that he said he's not necessarily going to say all the names that people got it from, because he says the famous saying, Kabbalah emes mishamra, makes no difference. Kabbalah emes, that makes no difference, mishamra, right? I mean, Kabbalah mishamra makes no difference who said it. But clearly held that, I mean, again, it is taka based a lot.
So then it's not, I would think that he's talking about Telos, some sort of, meaning, yeah, but he's saying it's physical.
It's clearly, because of the Gemara and the Vodazura, which is talking about that the venom becomes negated, becomes neutralized because of the fact that each gutzim v'remushim is a physical change in the body. And that's what he's talking about. Can we take out from the categories?
Isn't that collapsing the telos into the metaphysics?
But it has nothing to do with it. We're talking about the telos is the psychological makeup of the person. Right?
But
There's nothing
that the essence of the person
it's just the opposite. But the Gemara is clearly the essence is not different. Only because, as the Minchas Pitim points out, says they don't eat and therefore they're the same. So in other words, the baseline of even the physical is the same. If they do things which are different, then that can change it, which is obvious. If somebody goes under a surgery to change certain aspects of his thing, or he takes certain medication that changes his makeup, then yes, he's going to be different than a person that not. The question is, can we take it from him to a regular person? But it means clearly, even from the fact of the Gemara is saying, the fact that they don't eat shkutz v'remushim, that's technically what the Minchas Pitim is saying. If they do not eat shkutz v'remushim, they'll be exactly the same. It'll be exactly the same. In that case, that means obviously the essence is not different. But the point is, Bechal, the Chasam Sofer is Bechal not negayit to this. He's talking about completely the physical aspect. And the Gemara is clearly talking about the physical aspect. We're talking about something it can negate the venom, because the psychological aspect of a yid is different than the psychological aspect of a goy. Therefore, it can, because they eat shkutz v'remushim, and then metamtim halev, therefore it negates the venom. That makes absolutely no sense. It's clear in Telos it's not like that. I'm looking at Telos there. The Avos with Lam from Bayis on the last Telos. Clearly not like that. The Minchas Pitim never even mentions the word of Timtum Alev. Timtum Alev is a real thing, which is talking about the sensitivity, Pashas, the sensitivity that person has towards Kedusha. And Mechlal is Mechlokes exactly. What does Timtum Alev, how does Timtum Alev work? Is it that the actual eating itself is negative, and therefore it's Timtum Alev, or because the yid is not allowed to eat it? The vaida of eating, of being oived, is what causes Timtum Alev, and not that the actual food itself is Timtum Alev. That itself, that's some two ways of understanding and learning it. Or the third way is that a yid who is sensitive, therefore that is going to be Timtum Alev. A goy who is not sensitive, it does not be Timtum. Again, these whole points are all separate discussions. A kedusha, sensitivities to feelings and that, but not in the psychology, psychological. Psychology is simply trying to understand how does a person imbibe his understanding of words of basically is his lived experience in the world, and that has nothing to do with the telos. But it's obviously, yes, if a therapist is going to tell a person that you could go and don't have to go daven because you feel oppressed that you have things, then yes, there's halacha, which obviously, I mean, again, everything has every single case, the rice to the boon, depending on what it is, but the basic, on a general rule, of course, that's a problem, that you can't go, but as again, it's not the therapy per se, it is mixing in, I could put my values inside the other person. I'm allowing my values to tell me what the other person is doing right and wrong, as opposed to the method and the meta-psychology in of itself. You can, in other words, even the meta-psychology itself, right? You can understand the world, you can understand the person one way, and it's still going to be different, the therapy, the same way, because the telos is different. In other words, I'm going to tell you that you don't have to go davening, because I don't believe that davening is important, even though I believe it's the same person, and the therapy will be different. So it's not a matter of the therapy, and the meta-psychology obviously is important, but the most thing of your question is the telos is correct, but if you don't mix in the telos, the therapy has to be governed by telos to tell you what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. But to go say that the problem is because the yid is different, his telos, his whole mahalach, his whole tafkid is different, therefore he can't go to a goyish therapist, is completely to collapse the categories. So as Moshe says, yes, obviously you have to be careful because a goy could tell you his values. But again, the values is not the method, not the therapy. From the fact that Moshe does allow, if there is no other option, is by definition there is ultimately no difference. So his whole thing trying to say the difference between a yid and a goy when it comes to therapy is completely not supported by a single factor, and is a simply category mistake of collapsing, of mixing in three separate categories of telos, meta-psychology, and therapy.